Next, final section of today's show, Trevor, is going to talk about the Notre Dame or the Texas A&M defense and what it presents to Notre Dame, because Notre Dame's defense is going to be key to victory for them, and the Texas A&M defense is going to be key to them. If one of these two defenses doesn't play well, that team is in trouble, is absolutely in trouble. And, of course, you look at the A&M defense, and that's Mike Elko's baby. That's his bread and butter. You talked earlier about how he's improved places everywhere he's been, and so you look at some numbers, and you look at scoring defense, for example, and prior to Mike Elko taking over, well, let's look at Notre Dame first. In 2016, Notre Dame ranked 61st in the country in scoring defense, and in year one of Mike Elko's tenure, they jump all the way up to 31. That's an 18-point spot or a 30-spot improvement. During that 2017 season, Texas A&M had the number 87 scoring defense in the country. They gave up 30.7 points per game. In year one of Mike Elko's tenure, they jumped all the way up to 47, dropped 5 points off that per game average. And then the next year, they jump up to 36, all the way up to 22.5 points per game. In 2020, they jump up to 29th. In 2021, they jump up to 3. So there was just steady improvement year after year after year from Mike Elko being there. The year after he leaves, they drop down to 25. And then last year, they were 36th. There's a little bit of a trend, pretty steady trend that looks just like this pre and post Mike Elko when it comes to scoring defense. And it's not like they replaced him with a bum. They hired DJ Durkin, who's a solid defensive coordinator, in my opinion. So he certainly has done that. You look at what they did at Duke during his tenure as well. Trevor, it's the same story. In 2021, the year before Mike Elko arrived at Duke, they ranked 127th in scoring defense. They give up 39.8 points per game. In his first season at Duke, they jumped all the way up to 31st and only gave up 22.1 points per game that season. And last year, Duke ranked 16th in college football in scoring defense. They ranked ahead of Texas A&M in scoring defense by 20 spots with no 5-star defensive linemen. No, now they got some transfers came in, including a guy that came in from a couple guys, I think, from A&M. But the point is, this guy knows how to build really good defenses. And you know what? He's going to build really good defenses at Texas A&M. Unless for some reason in this past offseason, Mike Elko forgot how to recruit and develop defensive teams, they're going to be really good on defense in Mike Elko's tenure. The question that I have is, how much responsibility does he give Jay Bateman to run the defense? That's going to be my big question, because Jay Bateman is one of the most polarizing defensive coordinators in the business, in my opinion. Because there's some people that absolutely think he's a really good defensive coordinator, and they'll look at the success he had at Army. And then there's other people like me who don't think much of Jay Bateman as a defensive coordinator, and they're going to look at his tenure at North Carolina and his last couple years at Florida and question that. So who is Jay Bateman? Is he the guy that had the really good defenses at Army, the guy that had the awful defenses at North Carolina? I have a bit of a biased opinion of this that don't really need to share again because everybody already knows it. So that's going to be the interesting piece. Is Jay Bateman running Mike Elko's defense? If he is, then I think he'll be fine. If Mike Elko's kind of turning the reins over to Jay Bateman, then I think that's problematic. But knowing Mike Elko like I do, I think he hired Jay Bateman to run his defense and the things that they believe in, just like he had Tyler Santucci run his defense. Those principles are going to stay the same. The foundation of that defense is going to stay the same, which is why I think ultimately they're still going to be really good on defense. And why I don't say, like, if you're to tell me you knew that Mike Elko took a completely hands-off approach from the defense, I'd be like, Notre Dame's going to win this game easily. But he's not. That's not who Mike Elko is. So he's going to still have his fingerprints and his DNA all over this defense for the Aggies.
Bateman is the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M per Mike Elko's requests. That's how I like to think of it, because
I like that.
That's how I look at Bateman, right? And I think that, to your point, Bateman has a good foundation back when he was at Army, but then he gets up to that more Power 5 level of what he did at Florida and what he did at North Carolina, and you got more of a bigger sample size of what he's able to do when he gets fully handed over the reins. And I think with some tailoring to what he does, I think he could be a pretty decent defensive coordinator. Enter Mike Elko, right? Like that's where he comes into play. And now you're getting the star power of what Texas A&M has to offer on defense, especially in their front seven. But I think that especially for the first year, this is very much going to be a Mike Elko defense. Just under defensive coordinator, it will say Bateman on their roster, and that's who will be on the sideline and or up in the press box. I think that's how their system is going to be catered out.
I also have to think that Mike Elko clearly knows something about Jay Bateman because they've worked together before. They've known each other for 20 years. I believe they were on the same staff at Richmond back in the day. So there's obviously, and he can recruit. And so I expect this to be a very good defense. And let's talk about what makes Mike Elko's defenses effective. The biggest thing, there's two things that Mike Elko really emphasized at Notre Dame that I thought were really impactful. One is he is big time into being assignment correct at full force. He's not someone who has done a lot of exotic stuff in his tenure. You know, him and Al Golden don't really come from the same type of philosophy defensively from a X's and O's standpoint. I think they're very similar in philosophy from a what's the principle we're trying to get here, which is we're going to try to occupy every gap with full force and basically take, you know, and just create disruptions on your team. Now, Mike Elko is not a guy that I felt has ever been someone who necessarily obsesses over we've got to have 120 tackles for loss and we've got to have 50 sacks and that type of thing. There's a different type of disruptions that I think Mike Elko focuses on, and it's more so about just disrupting the ball, and you can do that a lot of different ways. You can do that with tackles for loss. You can do that with sacks. Obviously, you can do that with interception, but there's a lot of other things, you know, just forcing the ball to get put on the ground. You know, forcing the ball to get, you know, tipped passes. They would do a thing at Notre Dame when he was here, Trevor, which I really liked, which was they would have full turnover circuits, and they would have the whole defense focus on turnover circuits. I'm actually going through the numbers. I think 18 they ranked in the top 15 in tackles for loss, and outside of that, they were like never a top 25 team. It was about, you know, you look, everyone get to the ball. Impact the ball, breakups, tip passes from D linemen. They would practice that stuff every day. You know, coming up from behind, it's not enough to just sack the quarterback from behind. If you're coming up from behind, get the football, get your hand on the football. Very into disruptions, pass breakups, tips, forced fumbles, interceptions. It's about getting the offense out of rhythm that way, but not doing it where I'm trying to outsmart you. Because if you outsmart the other coach, there's a chance you're going to outsmart your own players.
Yep.
And that's where you can get into trouble. So it's about do your job with full force. They're going to be physical. They're going to fly downhill. They're going to be disciplined. Now, they will do some creative stuff on the back end with their safeties and corners. You know, who's going to trigger, who's in the box, who's dropping, you know, bringing corner fires, bringing nickel fires. They'll get creative with some of that stuff. But in the front seven, it's about do your job and do it hard and do it fast. And you're not going to see them run a million stunts. They don't run a lot of exotic blitzes. They will on third down. A lot of teams do that on third down. But on downs 1 and 2, it's do your job and do it with force. To do that, though, you need a specific type of player. I actually think he inherits a Texas A&M roster that up front has what he wants on the D-line, which is he wants big, long, tough, physical kids. Now, the physical part they've got to learn because they weren't really part of a team that emphasized physicality before, but they have the talent to be physical. Shamar Turner can be a disruptive player with proper coaching. Well, Mike Elko went and hired Sean Spencer, who built a lot of those great Penn State D-lines before he went to the NFL. You know, so he's got those big, long, powerful, athletic kids. It's just about getting them on the right page. And I think at linebacker, I think Torian York is going to put up ridiculous numbers, tackle numbers under Mike Elko. I really do. I think he's a great fit for what Mike Elko likes to do. So I think in the front seven, he inherits a roster that had a lot of what he looks for. I think there's a reason most of his portal emphasis was on the secondary. There was, I mean, that Solomon The Shields at linebacker was a portal pickup, and I know they got Scooby Williams, but like defensive line, they got a couple depth guys, but like they really needed to find starters in the secondary because the secondary did not fit what he's looking for, which is they want a bunch of Cam Harts is what they're looking for in their secondary. And that's what they went out and got. Will Lee, 6'3", BJ Mays is 6'1", Des Ricks, I think, is 6'1". He wants length, which is what he had in Blades last year, and then the other corner whose name escapes me, I think they got from A&M. He wants length outside, and they didn't have that. But in the front seven, I think A&M, he inherits a roster that has a lot of what Mike Elko wants in your D-line, which is I don't need to create a lot of pressures with my exotic pressures. It's you're going to do your job, and it's up to you to do it right, do it hard, and to beat the man in front of you. And he's got players that can do that.
His defenses are very intentional. It's done at 110% with discipline, which is what makes them so dangerous. Because there's some players that when they run at 100 miles an hour, things get a little chaotic, and he's done a really good job at having his players play with a controlled aggression. And I think that's what makes them so dangerous. There's been Notre Dame players before in the past where they have the ability and all the skill in the world, and they go 100 miles an hour, and they're missing tackles here. You know, they have guys come on a nickel fire or a free screaming blitzer off the edge, and all it takes is for the quarterback to step up, and he's 5 yards in the opposite direction, right? What Mike Elko does a really good job on defense is that controlled aggression, and that's going to be so dangerous, especially with the front seven that they have coming back. But I agree, very assignment-based. They are very intentional with everything that they do, and not from a standpoint of they try to trick you and they're not dropping ends into coverages and they're not nothing like that, but intentional in the goal is to try to get the football at every available opportunity that they have. You know, looking for the strip sack, looking to and pick off any tip ball. Everybody swarms to the football. It's a very active defense.
It's partly why I think Tavon Coney was so good at Notre Dame under Mike Elko. And then, of course, Clark Lee, who ran essentially a version of Mike Elko's defense because, you know, Tavon was a guy that was very instinctive, but Tavon was a guy that needed direction.
Yeah.
And he was a guy that needed to be kind of told, this is what you're doing. You're going to do this and you're going to do this. And Tavon was not a guy that was a self-motivated player when it came to doing things a certain way. And under Mike Elko, I mean, his game exploded. I'll give you an example, just looking at numbers, look at some PFF numbers. In 2016, the year before Mike Elko arrived, Tavon Coney played 251 snaps against the run. He had 30 total run stops and 5 missed tackles. The next year, he had 295 run snaps. There's only 44 more snaps, but he had 57 run stops, just 27 more run stops, and he only had 1 more missed tackle. His overall missed tackle rate went way down from what it was, and then it went down again the next year. So he was able to take a kid that had instincts and had physicality and force, but needed direction, and he could point